Hi, what's going on? I'm your host, as always, Antoine Johnson, host of the Releasing Pressure podcast. As always, I am joined by a special guest today, and I'm excited to have on with us Dr. Brianna Lemmons, all the way from Baylor University. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, as usual, I want to start us off with a quote and a verse for today. And so the verse is do not be deceived. God is not mocked. Whatever man sows, that which he shall reap. All right, Galatians 6 through 7. The quote for today is by Dr. or just Robert Louis Stevenson that says, don't judge each day by the harvest that you reap. Judge each day by the seeds that you sow. And so with that, I just want to get right into our conversation today, but throughout the years, and you're like someone that I look at as like a celebrity and the fatherhood field just from all of the stuff that I've seen. And so again, I'm just glad to have you on with us today. I'd like to kick us off by just getting to learn a little bit more about you. What got
hmm
you involved in the field of working with fathers and things of that nature. But then, like, what was life like growing up, like with your own family, right? Your father, your mother, like, what was that like, in terms of some of the inspiration or what have you that led you to where you are today?
Sure. So where do I begin? So I will start with my upbringing. So I grew up in the home with my father. He was a very present, very involved father growing up. And however, I had several siblings that were non-resident that did not live in the home with my sister and I. So my father was married twice. And so he married my sibling's mother, and that was long before I was ever born. He married her, and they had several children together. And my father adopted two children that she had already brought into the world. And so he was a non resident father to my other siblings, but was a resident father to my sister and I. And so I saw his struggle, particularly as a non resident father, trying to maintain his relationship with my siblings from a distance and not having a ton of support coming from their mother. And so I saw his struggle, and I knew the father that he was to my sister and I, and still is to this day. And I knew what he wanted to, the kind of father he wanted to be. I knew what he wanted to do, but he just didn't have the support that he needed. And so that really inspired me. When I first started this work, I was a doctoral student at Howard University, and I was doing some work with one of my mentors, Dr. Ivory Tolson. And at that time, I was looking at the achievement gap, particularly for young Black boys. And that while that was great, and I still credit him to this day for so much of my success and so many of the things that I learned from him. But when it came time to write my dissertation, I said to myself, I have to figure out something that is uniquely my own. While I've learned so much from his work, I need to carve my own niche. And so I did a lot of soul searching and a lot of reading and just praying and thinking, and so many things flooded my mind at that time regarding my own dad. And I had some time to really reflect on my relationship with him and what it has meant to me. And I recalled all the experiences that I witnessed him having as a father. And still to this day, there are strains in the relationship between my dad and my non-resident siblings, certain ones. And so I still continue to talk with my dad about, what he means to me, and trying to affirm him and uplift him in different ways, but I continue to watch him struggle. And so, as I reflected upon those things while I was a student at Howard, I said, I think this is my niche. I think this is my area. This feels like home for me. And so that's where it all began. It began during my doctoral work, and it was inspired by my relationship with my dad. And, this is the best way that I can see to honor him. Every day I'm always sharing different things with him now. I want to give him his flowers now. I want him to know that he's valuable now,
Mhm.
and so, when I write something, I usually try to include a dedication, in it to him. And when I write a book or I write, an article, I try to include that, and, I give him a copy of it. And I did another podcast recently and sent him the link, so yeah, so I've always been very close to my dad, and so, yeah, so this work is a testament to his raising and rearing of me, and all that he poured into me. And so this is home for me. This field is the gift that keeps on giving. There's so much work to be done. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a
Wow.
little bit about me.
What is that one memory that you have about your father growing up? One that really stands out to you when you think about your father kind of in the context of what you just talked about?
I mean, I don't think I have like a one specific memory, but I think like some of the memories I have is of him taking us to historically Black college campuses, colleges and universities, the campuses, and sort of encouraging us to pursue higher education. In his day, just having a high school education was considered an accomplishment. And so he always encouraged my sister and I to pursue higher education and to go further than what he was able to. And so I don't think he ever, and he tells me all the time, like he never imagined that I would go as far as I did, but he was definitely the inspiration for me pursuing and valuing higher education. So I just remember a lot, him taking us to college campuses. I remember him buying, like, it was a big thing back in the day for Black families to have encyclopedias in the home. So I remember him like purchasing encyclopedias and having that in the home and as a representation of the value of education. I remember they used to publish like a big, thick book. U.S. News and World Report would publish like all the college campuses, their addresses, their phone numbers, everything. It was like a big, thick book that they would publish every year. And he would always purchase that for us and give it to us. And so when it came time to apply to college, I did everything myself. And I could say a little bit more about that if it happens to come up. But my parents divorced when I was 17, and I ended up living my senior year of high school with my aunt and uncle. So I didn't live with either parent my senior year. But when it came time, that's such a critical year, for kids. And so when it came time to apply to college, because of everything that my dad had poured into me and all the memories that I had about him regarding education and the value of it, I knew what to do. I knew how to apply for financial aid. I knew how to write. At that time, college applications were not online. And so you had to write, and ask them to send you an application. And so I remember doing that, like sitting in my aunt's office in her apartment, like just on the computer all day, like writing to different colleges. Please send me an application. And so, so I think just generally my greatest memory of my dad is, and he's still living, so I don't want to talk as though he's not living. He's still here. And so thank God. And so, but growing up, for me, what stands out the most is the value and the emphasis that he placed on education. And then also just my dad's an Army veteran, and he instilled in me, discipline, honesty, integrity, organization, being organized, being disciplined. And that's something that has served me well in my career, not just my work with fatherhood, but my work as a professor. It has served me well in terms of applying those values and I was never in the military, but I gleaned, so much from what he got from the military. So, and just, the love that he provided as a father. I always tell people that, he was not the typical father. He was very nurturing, the typical in terms of how people tend to stereotype fathers. Like, I know that fathers are very diverse in the way that they love their children. I know that. But in terms of the typical stereotypes out there, my dad never fit that. He was always very nurturing and kind and patient, and he still is, to this day. So I remember those things about my dad as well. The time that he took with me to sit down with me, talk with me, be patient and understanding of, what I was going through, especially in my teenage years. So.
Yeah, wow. The way you talk about your father makes me think about something like on the opposite side. So my involvement in the fatherhood field came from a place of woundedness where I had to work through a lot of forgiveness toward my father. And, there's something called the father wound, right? That either boys or girls can have, men or women, what have you. And, and I'm used to being in groups and in spaces with mainly men and fathers. But I don't oftentimes get a chance to hear the other side where we understand that there are so many women who have father wounds because of broken relationships they had with their father, for whatever the case may be. What are your thoughts, or what do you say to women who feel like I didn't have the best relationship with my father, or now I feel like I can't have a healthy relationship with a guy, or I picked the wrong men because of my father's example, those kind of things. Like what do you typically say, if anything?
One of the ways in which I try to address that, I don't really get the opportunity to have those kinds of conversations much with women, but I feel like where those conversations typically end up coming into play is in my classroom. When I'm talking with my students about, and I don't teach fatherhood courses, I teach statistics and research methods. So these topics don't typically come up very organically. But when I have the chance, I try to to offer guest lectures and different examples in my courses of fatherhood research and things. I try to integrate fatherhood related things where it makes sense. And sometimes the questions and the thoughts and the things come up, regarding their relationships with their own dads. And that's one of the things that is very challenging for me about being in the social work profession, is that we are not intentionally training our students to work effectively with men and fathers. And so you do have a lot of women that struggle in their relationships with their father, or their brother, their husband, or whomever the man is in their life that they might have a strained relationship with. And so I often ask my students, well, how would you deal with a man who has been divorced and lost access to his children? Or how would you intervene in a situation with a man who has multiple children with multiple women? These are complex dynamics and circumstances. Are you comfortable with intervening in those? And most of the time, there's a lot of angst around it, is what I find with students. And they're not really talking about the strains that they're having in their relationships and how that might impact their practice. But I think when I have the opportunity to talk with women about their relationships with their own fathers, I always encourage them to really reflect upon those relationships and think about how it might be affecting their parenting, or their marriage. Because you have some women that, because they didn't have a father, they don't necessarily really push for their children having a relationship with their father. Sometimes they're, some women, not all, but some, whatever the relationship is that they have with their father kind of trickles down into their parenting and how they are rearing their children. And so, and sometimes it's not, people are not always consciously aware of that. And so I think when I do have these opportunities to talk with women, I try to engage them in exercises, conversations, in different thought-provoking methods of getting them to think about, what is your relationship with your father? Reflect on that. Think about that. How, and once you had an opportunity to think about it, then think about how is it affecting your work with fathers? How is it affecting your parenting, your co-parenting? How is it affecting you? Because sometimes we try to convince ourselves that not having that parent present, that we're okay with that, but it does leave a wound. It does leave a wound. It does leave a hole in your heart in certain ways that we're not always aware of. We're not always consciously aware of. And so I think that's always I try to encourage people to really think about it and reflect on it.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. I guess this is a good segue into something that I didn't think about in terms of planning to ask, but tell us more about the Black Female Fatherhood Scholars Network, and you being the founder and the president. I didn't even realize that initially. So tell us more about like how that all came about.
Okay, sure. So I started the Black Female Fatherhood Scholars Network in 2020. So this year is our 5-year anniversary. And the part of the reason I started it was in part to honor my father, but also because I was at the time we were in COVID, and couldn't really go many places. And so, when I'm forced to be at home and can't go anywhere, all kinds of creative ideas start to brew. And it was something that had been on my heart for a long time. And I was doing so much great work with other Black women in the field. And I was like, this is powerful, like the fact that we are all choosing, we could be doing so many other kinds of work, and we could have gone down so many other roads and taken so many other trajectories, but we're here. We've all made a conscious decision and choice to be in the field of fatherhood as a woman. And so I thought the idea of that was very fascinating. And so I said to a couple friends one day, I said, I want to start a network of women that are in the fatherhood field. I want to provide a space, for women that allows them to build a sense of community around other women that just get it, that understand, and provide a way for these women to do this work unapologetically. Like, we don't need to apologize for being a woman studying fathers. And so, that's really a big part of the reason that I started the network, was to honor my father and also to provide a sense of community. And we started with maybe about 5 women, and we're at about 25 or so today. And so we've grown exponentially over the years, and we have, every year we get better. We add on additional components to what we do as a network, but primarily we provide research, education, and training as it relates to Black fathers and Black families. So in our name, it does not say families, it says fatherhood. One of the first things that I had to realize in studying fatherhood is that it's important to understand family structure. And it is important to understand relationships. Relationships are very key to fatherhood. And so, so we do family work too. And we have part of our work is focused on Black fatherhood. And then we have another area that we call the Black Love Lab. So we have both sides, Black fatherhood and Black love in relationships. And a big part of what we do, which we'll be doing this summer, is a summer research lab where we bring together faculty and students from across the nation. And it's virtual, it's all online. And we come together and we work on various different research projects related to Black fatherhood and Black families. And so last summer, we had about 15 students and 15 faculty, and we had like 19 different projects going on in the lab at the same time. So it was a good time. It was a good time. So that's a big part of what we do. We want to provide students, especially students of color, with opportunities to engage in research. We want to provide faculty opportunities to mentor students. And we also want to be shaping the next generation of Black fatherhood and family scholars, so who will come behind us, and do this and continue this work. So that's very important to the work that we do with the network as well.
That's huge. That's huge. Yeah, no, I'm grateful for what you all are doing. What's so interesting is periodically I will hear, particularly from organizations, well, can a woman facilitate a fatherhood program or whatever they're looking to do, and maybe they're short of male staff. And I often will say some of the best folks in the fatherhood field that I look up to are women. Like I think about people like Dr. Latrice Rollins out of ATL, and yourself, learning more about your work, and so I'm always like, absolutely, some women, in my opinion, do fatherhood work better than some of the men out there, right? So I'm so glad that you shared that. It also helps to demystify some of the misconceptions that women have, or may have, when they think about how to support fatherhood work or just families in general. So I guess, I don't know how much of a segue this is, but can we talk a little bit about your work, specifically with non-residential fathers? I know you shared your personal story, but can you share with us a little bit more about your work around non-resident fathers, and particularly like some of the things that are unique and things that you've seen that are, how do I put this, not necessarily helpful, but I think there's a misconception that society has sometimes when we hear about like non-residential fathers or fathers who don't live in a household. Sometimes they're deemed as just absentee, when that's not the case. Or some fathers may feel less than because they don't live in the same household, and things of that nature. So can you talk a little bit more about your work and some of the things you've seen in the field?
Yeah, so one of the first things I want to say when it comes to non-resident dads is that I would want people to understand is that, first of all, many of them are involved, but they are involved in ways that we don't yet completely understand or that often go unseen. And then also, sometimes not being there and not being involved it's not always a choice. Oftentimes, it's not a choice. And, because their co-parent, the woman that they co-parent with has an awful lot of control and power over that man's relationship with his children. And sometimes even her mother, right? So you have the mother and the maternal grandmother that have an incredible amount of power over that man's relationship with his children. So oftentimes, if a man is not, and it's rarely ever the case that a man is absolutely not involved with his children. That is very rare. But there are also many instances in which it's not a choice to be there or not be there. Like it's literally the man is shut out of his child's life. So that is often, that happens quite a bit. And, that's not to say that there are some men that are just, not present and have opportunities to be present and are not. You have some that fall into that category as well. But I really want to speak to the folks that think, that being non-resident means you don't care, you don't want to be there, and you're just deadbeat, quote unquote. That is not true for many men. And so, I just want to dispel that. Non-resident fathers are involved in many ways that we don't yet understand. We think we understand the resident father, but there are a lot of ways in which we don't even understand men that live in the home. And we often assume that men that live in the home are involved. And oftentimes they're not. And sometimes, interestingly, what you'll see with non-resident fathers is that they're more involved because they're overcompensating. Right? They're not there. They don't share a home with the child. So they're overcompensating for that. Whereas sometimes men that live in the home, they get a little bit comfortable, right? And they're not as involved. And then they have their wife there or their significant other there, maybe taking on many of the tasks, right, regarding raising that child. Not to say that the man is not involved. I never want to say a man is not involved. I can't, be in everybody's household to know this for sure. But my point is that, we often assume that non-resident fathers are not involved because they don't share a residence. But not sharing a residence does not define a man's involvement with his children. And so, we just want to get that out of the way. Not sharing a residence does not mean it. And so I'll say that. And then the other thing that I'm actually working on currently, particularly as it relates to social workers that are working in direct service with non-resident fathers, is that, there are so many different non-resident, this term non-resident comprises a very diverse group of men. And I find that oftentimes social workers don't necessarily understand when we use the term non-resident, what does that mean? And so part of my work currently that I'm going to be working on with some students this summer is writing a piece that helps social workers to understand what is meant by the term non-resident, what types of dads fall within this category, what are their unique needs. So under this umbrella of non-resident fathers, you have military fathers, you have incarcerated fathers, you have fathers that have children in the child welfare system or in the care of kin. You have fathers that are divorced or separated. You have fathers that have never been married to their child's mother and are living apart from their children. So this is a very diverse group of men. You have teen fathers. Oftentimes we forget about teen fathers. And so I'm doing some work around teen young fathers as well, separate project, but I've ventured into that area too in terms of looking at young fathers. But young fathers fall under that group too. Because if they are young and they've had a child, oftentimes they might still live with their parents and not live full time in the home with their child. So teen fathers, young fathers fall under that umbrella as well. And so I think that, we need to really better understand this group and what their unique needs are. And provide ways in which clear directives and ways in which social workers and other helping professionals, I say social work a lot because that's my profession, but this is really true for all helping professions. I think we all need to be more knowledgeable about non-resident fathers. And that's part of the reason why I went into this field is because I wanted to dispel the myths. I wanted to change the narrative, particularly as it relates to non-resident dads, because I knew when I first started this work that naturally they just get a bad rap. It's assumed that because they don't share a residence that they're not involved. But slowly but surely, the literature is debunking, this myth and showing ways that non-resident fathers are actually involved. And as I mentioned before, sometimes they overcompensate and they're even more involved because they're like, hey, I don't share a home with I don't have the privilege of sharing a home with my child. So when I do have them, let me be the best father that I can be. Let me be as present and as involved as I can be because I don't have the opportunity to share a residence. And the last thing that I'll say is that it's not a cakewalk for these men to not be involved. Many of them are suffering in silence, because they want to be involved and they have that co-parenting relationship is so key. And I recently just did a study looking at, and it wasn't just non-resident fathers, it was Black fathers in general, but looking at the co-parenting relationship and how it impacts the mental and physical health of Black fathers. And it impacted every single indicator of mental and physical health that we looked at, it impacted it, particularly when the co-parent was undermining the father's parenting. So we really have to, especially for non-resident fathers, really look at this co-parenting relationship and how it's impacting their ability to be fathers in the ways that they aspire to be. But I think it's important that we understand that it's not easy and that there are many different factors that impact a non-resident father's involvement with his children. And it's a co-created kind of role. It's not something that the father gets to decide upon himself. So I think it's, we have to take these things into consideration.
Wow. That was powerful. I love the idea of the co-created kind of role that it means a lot. I'm sure it looks different for every relationship, but it's a very relatable way to think about when you think about those kind of relationships because they're so unique and it takes a lot to all the points you made for it to work specifically in a way that is conducive to a child's ability to have the relationship with both his mom and dad and so forth. You were talking about like involvement and I love what you're talking about, like dads who are residential versus non-residential and that whole thing. One of
Mhm.
my other good friends here from the University of Buffalo, Dr. Christopher St. Bill, talked about how as can be, residential, living at home, but disengaged, right? To the
Mhm.
point you made where like, just kind of propped up on the couch, hanging out, and the kids are running around and it's like no engagement. And
Mhm.
I think that, that was one of the things that you spoke to. And it's not something that people probably think about a lot, unless you have conversations and folks are like, yeah, like my dad was around, but he wasn't really involved. He wasn't engaged with me. He didn't really know me, that kind of things.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you shedding some light on all of that related to non-residential fathers. Yeah, so and you talked about some work that you are getting into this summer. Anything else coming in maybe early next year or later this year?
Yeah. So, well, before I say that, I will say Chris St. Ville, I do know him and his wife. We went to Howard together. So shout out to the St.
Okay,
Villes. But yeah, so plenty of stuff going on this summer. So I have that project, the non-resident father project that I mentioned. And then I'm currently working on, it is a longitudinal qualitative study. So it's like happening over the course of some years where I met a colleague on Twitter. Her name is Dr. Anna Tarrant, and she's at the University of Lincoln in the UK. And she is very well known for her work related to young fathers. And prior to meeting her, I hadn't really focused on young fathers as a sort of subgroup within the broader fatherhood field. And so I've learned so much from her, but she's doing something that is very unique in terms of typically when we go in to do research and we interview fathers, we just interview them one time. But she is implementing a longitudinal model where she's following them over the course of their lives as young fathers. And so, literally, the project is called Following Young Fathers Further. And so, I've joined her on this project and I have collected some data. I spent my summer a couple of years ago in barbershops in Waco interviewing young fathers as well as the barbershop owners as mentors of these young men who were working alongside them and helping them to achieve their license as barbers. And so I was able to interview 5 young men so far about their parenting experiences and really looking at the local context of Waco and how that shapes their needs and experiences as fathers and in their relationships with those who are around them day to day. And so I am digging into that, or I will be digging into that data this summer along with a couple of students. Our first paper that we're going to produce from that is looking at neighborhood dynamics and spaces of care. So meaning like where do these young men go to receive care in their role as fathers? And so that'll be our first paper out of that project. But this is a really interesting and new study for me in that it's really a cross-country comparative kind of study. And I'll give you an example. For example, some of the themes that we've seen crop up in the data are consistent with the UK, but then there are some that are different in terms of in our data, the discussion of race is more prominent among these young fathers in the US versus in the UK, class is more prominent in the data, issues of class as it relates to their experiences with parenting. We're seeing some similarities and some differences, but this is the first time that I've done such a project. So this has been really exciting. I was able to take a student a couple of years ago with me to the UK to do some data sharing and some collaboration with our partners there. So I'll be working on that project. And then another project that I'll be working on it's related to want to launch a nationwide survey looking at Black love, various aspects of Black love in relationships. So I want to collect some data from Black couples across the US, and we haven't decided on what variables we'll include in the data set just yet. But as I mentioned before, we have the Black fatherhood side of our research lab, and then we have the Black love side. And so we've already done a nationwide survey of Black fathers on the Black fatherhood side. We don't have any data yet on the Black love side. So this summer, I'm going to be working with Dr. St. Ville, actually, Chris's wife, Noelle St. Ville. Her dissertation was actually related to Black relationships. And so she will be leading that project, and I'll be co-leading with her and a couple students. And so we're going to be putting together the survey this summer on that on that side of the coin of the network. So those are some of the things that I'm going to be working on this summer.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, we love Noel and Chris. They're like family. You brought up Black Love. Are you familiar with Dr. Armand Perry's work around Black Love?
Yes, indeed. We recently had a webinar. It was on Black Love Day. So a lot of people don't realize it like this is a thing, but it's Black Love Day, which is February 13th. And so we had Dr. Perry and Dr. Diane Stewart, because we know Dr. Perry has written a book on Black men and marriage. And then Dr. Diane Stewart, who is out of Emory University, has written a similar kind of book on Black women in marriage. So we had both of them on the podcast, and it was dynamic. It was really, I can send you the link if you're interested in listening. It was
Yeah.
so good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love Dr. Perry's work. I've actually had him here in Buffalo at least twice now for a couple of conferences, fatherhood conferences that we've done. So he's really good. And I met him through a mutual friend a couple of years back. But yeah, so and that's right. I did see a couple of emails come through around that event back in February, and I think I registered but didn't get a chance to sign to attend. So yeah, that's right. No, I love what you all are doing. It's so needed because I think that there are many, not just young people, but folks who aspire to for Black love, right? And to have healthy relationships and may not have seen that model, including myself. And
Mhm.
so for you all to be involved in the work and bringing in research and folks who have lived experiences really helps the next generation to set them up, to set me up. For instance, my wife and I will be married 7 years this coming July, and
Okay,
time is
congratulations.
flying by. Thank you. We're actually expecting our third child this week.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah, talk about black love and fatherhood. So, so
Yeah.
yeah, a lot is going on these days. But
Yeah.
yeah, I so appreciate you for joining me today. I know your week is busy and you're probably trying to wrap some things up and so forth. Last thing is because this is the Releasing Pressure podcast, one of the things that I want to ask you is how do you release pressure? So one of the things that I do when I think about releasing pressure, it's not just the stress and things like that that comes with life, is how do I let go of the things that may be not as important in the season of my life so that I can pursue God's purpose for my life without feeling all of the pressure from the world that really doesn't matter anyways. And so how do you release pressure in terms of moving forward and the things that you feel called or led to do?
Yeah, so I think couple things. I think from a spiritual standpoint, prayer is key. Praying and asking God for the things that my heart desires, and then kind of releasing it, at that point and just letting it go and allowing God to do what God does, and then I think too, one of the things I did this year that was really beneficial for me and something I'd never done was at the top of the year. I think it was maybe about 30 days. I can't remember how long the fast was. I was fasting with my church. And normally, the fast consists of food. You do some type of Daniel fast or, something involving modification of your diet. Well, this year I decided to fast from the phone, from television, from social media. And that really helped me to release a lot of things and to bring a lot of clarity. And that's part of the reason why you got that message from me about Holy Week. I'm doing something similar this week, where it's like just pausing on the email and the everything, and taking this time to observe and reflect on the significance of this week. So I think, putting myself on some forced timeouts, helps me to release a lot of things. And then from a physical standpoint, exercise. Exercise really helps to clear my mind, to keep me sharp mentally, to release stress and pressure. I've gotten away from my exercise this semester because I've been teaching 3 classes, which is a heavy load, and I said I would never do again if possible. But when I am regularly exercising, it's a huge release for me. It's really a game changer. For some people, it doesn't really affect them much, but for me, it does wonders. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm right with you. Well, yeah, I love the fast piece, the distractions, all that, phones, and I can't tell you how many times whenever I choose to turn off my phone after work and just, be with the kids or have dinner without being interrupted. I just have a different level of peace because I'm not thinking about an email or a text message or nobody calling me and any of that stuff. And so there's just something about like those simple things, removing some of those things that you mentioned that could be really helpful. So again, thank you. Thank you so much. And even now I'm more appreciative given what you just said about how like this is your week to like just dial some things back, so to
Yeah.
speak. Just appreciate you for carving out or taking some time to have this conversation with me. So I hope you have a good rest of the week. And God bless. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.